The rising sun first strikes the United States at Cobscook Bay in eastern Maine. This is a special place of fir-clad headlands and quiet landlocked bays, of salmon rivers and wild lakes, saltwater farms, and tranquil, close-knit towns, soaring eagles, and breaching whales. This is Downeast Maine, long settled yet sparsely populated by a strong, resilient people who still support their families from the land and sea. To those who have made their living on these shores, the Cobscook region has earned a special character of its own. For those who live here and those who visit, it is a last bastion of real Maine values, traditions, and a way of life. The Passamaquoddy Indians named this bay Cobscook, the place of boiling water. Twice a day, 18 to 20-foot tides, the highest in the lower 48 states, flood a bewildering complex of bays, coves, and estuaries. The surge enters the bay at Shackford Head, near the city of Eastport, and floods the outer Pennamaguan River estuary and South Bay, a 17-mile expanse of water. Falls Island guards the narrow entrance to the quiet Denny's, Whiting, and Strait Bays. Here, the turbulent water rages around the island, creating one of the most unique natural features of the bay, a reversing falls, whose roar can be heard for miles on both flood and ebb tides. The upwelling waters on either side of the falls give the impression of boiling water, from whence the bay received its name. From Falls Island, the bay extends 15 miles north to the estuary of the Denny's River, and 15 miles south to the Whiting River estuary. The tranquil inner bays encompass hundreds of miles of rocky shoreline and acres of mudflats, and are key feeding areas for wildlife. When the tide leaves Cobscook Bay, the water surges past Shackford Head and into Head Harbor Passage, the Lubec Channel, and the Western Passage, around the Canadian Grand Manan, Campobello, and Deer Islands, and into the Bay of Fundy. In the international waters off Eastport, the outgoing flux of water from Cobscook Bay collides with the retreating waters of Canadian Passamaquoddy Bay to create the Old Sow, thought to be the second largest whirlpool in the world. The receding waters rush through the Lubec Narrows and pass by the rocky promontories of West Quoddy Head, the easternmost point in the United States. Here, near the town of Lubec, the roiled waters drop part of their burden of silt and form the great expanse of the Lubec Flats and salt marshes, a haven for clam diggers and migratory birds alike. Cobscook Bay is the most productive marine ecosystem in Maine. The tide brings billions of gallons of water dredged from the bottom of the cold Atlantic, laden with life-giving nutrients. These nutrients-rich waters support vast populations of phytoplankton that form the base of a diverse food chain that supports an abundance of life. Marine scientists have known the unique nature of Cobscook Bay for years. Here, many species of intertidal invertebrates grow to exceptionally large size. Cobscook Bay is the only place in the world where some boreal invertebrates can be found intertidally. The Crowneck Preserve is recognized by the Maine Critical Areas Program as a particularly diverse site. Marine invertebrates, in turn, provide food for many of the fish and wildlife species that we are more familiar with. The bald eagle is probably the most prominent resident of Cobscook Bay. When pesticides contamination all but eliminated bald eagles elsewhere on the East Coast, Cobscook Bay was the last haven for nesting eagles. The tidal flux helped purge the bay of contaminants and the majestic birds found refuge to build their nests and raise their young along the quiet shores. In 1972, only 6 eaglets were raised in Maine. 4 of these were raised in Cobscook Bay. When DDT was banned in 1978, eagles born in Cobscook Bay helped to repopulate Maine and neighboring New Brunswick. Today, there are 15 to 17 pairs of eagles nesting in Cobscook, the highest nesting density in the state. The number of young eagles produced annually averages about 1 young per nest. This is encouraging news for the recovery of our national symbol and indicates the clean environment of the Cobscook Bay ecosystem. Cobscook Bay also attracts a large number of wintering eagles. 300 to 400 eagles are attracted to the bay by open water and the availability of abundant food. As many as 35 eagles have been observed at one time. Most of the eagles come from Maine and the Maritime provinces, but eagles from as far away as Saskatchewan, Ontario, Michigan, and South Carolina have been observed. Waterfowl use wetlands and estuaries on the bay year-round, but Cobscook is especially important to black ducks during the winter, hosting more than a quarter of the state's population. Old squaw, Canada geese, golden eyes, mergansers, and buffleheads are also found in ice-free coves. The bay also hosts internationally important populations of shorebirds on their fall migration. Tens of thousands of Sandpipers and Plovers flock to Cobscook Bay each year from July to September. Although these birds are with us for only a few short weeks, Cobscook Bay and the upper bay of Fundy are a vital link to their continued survival. Shorebirds nest in the brief Arctic summer north of Hudson Bay. Immediately after their eggs hatch, the adults leave the young to fend for themselves and fly non-stop for thousands of miles to the large mudflats in Cobscook Bay. Here they feed voraciously on an annual harvest of abundant intertidal invertebrates. This energy-rich food replenishes their energy reserves from their flight from Canada and readies them for the next leg of their journey to wintering areas in South America. Although a sandpiper or plover stays in Cobscook Bay for only 2 weeks, they more than double their body weight in fat reserves. Each time the tide recedes, shorebirds fly from traditional high-tide roosting sites to the mudflats to feed. For the 5 or 6 hours the mudflats are exposed, the birds feed continuously, eating marine worms, shrimp, and snails. Each species has unique feeding adaptations, enabling many species to congregate here without competing for food. The young shorebirds arrive in Cobscook Bay in late summer. How they find their way to the bay and onward to join their parents at wintering areas is a mystery. After the shorebirds have acquired sufficient quantities of fat reserves, they become increasingly restless. When the winds are just right, the skies above the Lubec mudflats are awhir with the sound of wings as flock after flock flies out to sea. The birds fly non-stop over 1,500 miles over the Atlantic until they reach landfall on their wintering quarters in South America. Most shorebird species fly at speeds of up to 60 miles an hour and at heights of up to 4 miles. A semi-palmated sandpiper the size of a sparrow was captured and banded in Lubec on August 26. It was recovered 48 hours later in Suriname on the northeast coast of South America. Some of the larger shorebirds fly as far south as Argentina before reaching landfall. In the spring, shorebirds return to their Arctic nesting grounds using migration routes across the Gulf of Mexico and through central North America. Because shorebirds traverse many political boundaries on their annual migrations, their conservation has become of international concern. Each of the critical staging areas used on their endless migrations is a vital link to their continued survival. The loss of shorebird roosting areas and feeding areas in Cobscook Bay would result in a substantial number of birds failing to complete their transoceanic flight. For this reason, the most important roosting and feeding areas in Cobscook Bay have been identified as of critical international importance and targeted for protection. Like shorebirds, seabirds are attracted to the wealth of marine life in Cobscook Bay. There are only a few islands suitable for nesting by eiders, gulls, and cormorants in Cobscook Bay itself. However, seabird nesting islands of major importance lie in Canadian waters, supported by the productive waters of Cobscook Bay. Great cormorants, puffins, and razorbill auks are found at the southernmost extreme of their range, on nesting colonies at Whitehorse Island and Machias Seal Island. Even the largest of seabirds in the North Atlantic, the gannets, have attempted to nest in Cobscook Bay. In the summer of 1983, gannets attempted to incubate fishing buoys and dories in Eastport and Grand Manan Islands. Although they didn't succeed in hatching their super eggs, perhaps someday a gannet colony may be founded on the waters off Cobscook Bay. Marine mammals abound in the Cobscook region. Some, like harbor seals and right whales, raise their young in the productive waters. Harbor porpoises, white-sided dolphins, minke, finback, and humpback whales also congregate here in late summer on their annual migrations from the Arctic calving grounds to their wintering areas in the Caribbean. Even comparably rare killer whales have been sighted off Eastport. Harbor seals are the most common marine mammal found in Cobscook Bay. Several hundred of these animals are found in the bay, except for the cold winter months when they migrate to the Cape Cod area. In the winter, harbor seals are replaced by their larger relatives from the north, the gray seals. Occasionally, white-sided dolphins and harbor porpoises wander into Cobscook Bay. Areas of upwelling are created when the retreating tide of Cobscook and Passamaquoddy bays collide with the receding waters of the upper bay of Fundy near Campobello and Grand Manan Islands. Here, right, humpback, and finback whales gather to seine herring and shrimp from the waters. All of these leviathans are endangered species, and as with shorebirds, the Bay of Fundy is a key staging area on their seasonal migrations. Stocks of these whales are still low after a century of persecution from Yankee whalers. However, most species are increasing. The Atlantic right whale was nearly brought to extinction because they were the right or preferred whale to those who hunted whales. Today, they are one of the most endangered whales on Earth, and only about 200 are believed to be in existence. In the last decade, researchers have discovered that about half of these whales use the Bay of Fundy at the outlet of Cobscook Bay in late summer and early fall. Here they raise calves and perhaps mate. Some believe that there are enough right whales left to keep the species alive. Major environmental degradation to the Cobscook ecosystem would jeopardize the possibility of recovery for these majestic animals. Cobscook is truly a special place. For nearly 200 years, its residents have served as good stewards of these abundant natural resources, leaving us a legacy of wildlife and a near pristine environment. In recent years, the clean environment and wild nature of these shores have made the bay more attractive to land speculators. As generations-old farms are subdivided and shorefront property values soar, many local families find they can no longer afford their taxes, or their children cannot afford land of their own. Clammers and fishermen, hunters and trappers are losing access to the shore and forests. More people bring increased disturbance, erosion of environmental quality, and the steady degradation of wildlife habitat. This quiet tide could overwhelm our ability to preserve our environment and our way of life. It's time to step back and examine where we're headed. What will Cobscook Bay be like 5 years from now or 20 years from now? During the last decade, a consortium of local, state, and federal conservation groups have been quietly working to preserve the wild heritage of this region and find new opportunities for local residents to find employment compatible with their changing environment. The challenge today is to develop a variety of conservation tools that enable local residents to ensure the future of the resources that they have preserved for generations and from which their livelihood depends. Outright purchase of lands is only one of several solutions to conserve natural resources in Cobscook Bay. Several important but widely separated sites have already received protection. In the last 15 years, the Nature Conservancy, a private organization, purchased Coggins Head, Long Island, Wilbur Neck, Hog Island, and Bellier Cove, protecting several of the most productive eagle nests in the bay. The Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Department of Conservation purchased or leased lands at Great Works Pond and at Quoddy Head and Cobscook Bay State Parks for wildlife and recreation. Suffolk and New England colleges have large holdings on the bay for studying marine life. And the Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge was established adjacent to Cobscook Bay in 1938. But threats to the bay are increasing, and additional areas need to be protected if we are to ensure its unique resources will endure. Doing the job will require the continued cooperation and ingenuity of conservation groups, land trusts, and agencies. Increasing land costs and the necessity to develop conservation measures compatible with local interests have forced a reevaluation of land protection tools. Creative state and local interests have engineered new and innovative ways to protect our natural heritage in Cobscook Bay, and at the same time preserve a semblance of a way of life that has survived for generations. A group of Cobscook area residents created the Quoddy Land Trust in 1987 to encourage and advise landowners who are interested in protecting their land. Conservation easements have been the most popular tool to conserve lands of greatest resource value, but restricted sales and leases and mutual covenants are all new ways to preserve the unique land holdings. The Quoddy Regional Land Trust seeks to preserve traditional uses of the bay, ensure public access to clam flats and harbors, and protect wildlife habitat and other natural resources in the region. Nancy Nielsen of the Quoddy Regional Land Trust.
Well, the Quoddy Regional Land Trust is a nonprofit organization like the other land trusts in the state, and we are a little bit unusual in that we're a regional land trust, basically a watershed association, if you want to think of it that way. We're concerned with Cobscook Bay and with the rivers and lakes that feed the bay, so we represent over 14 towns. It's a big area for a small land trust. Our main interest is in preserving some of the land from development, some of the land that's traditionally been open land. People have never realized how much private landowners have donated to them in terms of open space and shore access until this recent big development boom. And we're trying to help see that the communities retain some of the things that people have counted on as part of their way of life. It's 50 miles for me, one way to a movie. And it's a long way to a concert or a library or even shopping. That's true for all of us who live up here, and the reason we've made this choice to drive 100 miles round trip to a movie is that we can see eagles more often than we see movies, and that means so much to us. That's one place where the natives and the newcomers have a lot of the same feelings. We appreciate what we've got here in terms of the wildlife value.
The Eastport Land Trust has also played a critical role in conserving the bay. Shackford Head was once proposed for a tidal power facility, a major oil refinery, and a coal-powered electrical generation plant. This valuable real estate was purchased by the Land for Maine's Future Board to be set aside as a recreational area. Cobscook Bay has also been identified as a priority for protection under the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, an agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico to restore declining duck and goose populations by protecting critical waterfowl habitats. Joint ventures, cooperative efforts between federal, state, and local partners have been set up under the plan. In Maine, a Wetlands Protection Coalition was formed in 1988. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing to protect critical black duck and eagle habitat on Bellier, Youngs, and Ox Coves as part of the Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge.
We have Edmonds unit of the refuge, which is about 6,000 acres, and we want to expand into the Bay Area simply because over the last 5 to 10 years, I've been here 12 years, and the development, the summer homes, the subdivisions are starting, I believe, and will certainly in the future impact on the fish and wildlife values, the shorebirds, black duck habitat, and obviously will impact the eagle nesting in the area. And we want to take and see if we can get some sort of control over the types of development that are being done there.
The Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Land for Maine's Future Board have acquired land or conservation easements on Whiting Bay and Denny's Bay, protecting more than 7 miles of shoreline.
Cobscook Bay represents a wintering area for approximately 25–26% of our black duck population in the state. Many other species, including seals, whales, oceanic marine species, make use of Cobscook Bay and its areas, and so it's in the state. It's of statewide significance, and with respect to shorebirds and bald eagles and some other species, there's actually it's at the level of international significance. So this area has been identified as one of the primary wildlife resource areas in the state that is in need of our attention and management.
The Maine chapter of the Nature Conservancy purchased shorebird habitat of significant international importance on Lubec Flats. The Maine Coast Heritage Trust purchased and obtained easements on the Bold Coast, a 20-mile stretch of scenic headlands south of Lubec. Exemplary of the new cooperative approach to protecting Cobscook's unique resources and preserving local occupation of the land is the purchase of the land and conservation easements on 1,733 acres on Whiting Bay. The centerpiece of negotiations was Tide Mill Farm, which has been home to 8 generations of the Bell family. The feat of keeping their 223-year-old farm and family ownership required many adaptations over the years. The purchase of conservation easements and development rights by the state of Maine ameliorates pressure from increased land values and changing economic times. Bob and Terry Bell and their families believe that easements are the best way to meet the goals of maintaining local values and preserving the Bay's vital natural resources.
Washington County is a hard area to make a living, and because of that, there are some people who are thinking of leaving the land, and their value is in the land, and there's no way to get compensated for that value unless it's sold out completely. That allows room for developers to come in, and hopefully they want to make a profit by selling for second homes. I see that I personally have done this, but the purchase of an easement could allow the person to get the capital back out of his land, stay living there, and manage it the way it's been known to be managed in the past, and that has helped wildlife.
I feel it's natural for the farmer to always leave his land in better shape than he received it in. And I think that's been the goal of mine, and that's been the goal of our forefathers.
Thanks to the Bell family and other members of the Wetlands Protection Coalition, several important pieces of Cobscook heritage will endure. But there's still more to be done, and you can help. If you own land, contact groups like the Quoddy Regional Land Trust for information on protection options and tax advantages that are available to you. Anyone wanting to protect the Bay can support the work of state and national groups that are funding these efforts. You may also wish to join one of the groups participating in the Maine Wetlands Protection Coalition. Our wildlife and our quality of life are in the balance. Together, we will make a difference.